The Smudge by Fannie Hurst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. The Smudge by Fannie Hurst. From The Vertical City. In the bleak little graveyard of Hattie Birch's dead hopes, dead loves, and dead ecstasies, more than one headstone had long since begun to sag, and the wreaths of bleeding heart to shrivel. That was good, because the grave that is kept bubbly with tears is a tender, quivering thing, almost like an amputated bit of self that still aches with threads of life. Even over the mound of her dead ambitions, which grave she had dug with the fingers of her heart, Hattie could walk now with unsensitive feet. It had become dry clay with cracks in it like sardonic smiles. Smiles. That was the dreadful part, because the laugh where there have been tears is not a nice laugh, and Hattie could sit among the headstones of her dead dreams now and laugh, but not horridly, just drearily. There was one grave, Heart's Desire, that was still a little moist, but it, too, of late years had begun to sink in like an old mouth with receding gums, as if the very teeth of a smiling dream had rotted. They had. Hattie, whose heart's desire had once been to play Juliet, played maids now, buxom negro ones with pale palms, white eyes, and the beat of a kettle drum somewhere close to the cuticle of the balls of her feet. She was irrevocably down on managers' and agents' lists as "comedy black." Countless the premieres she had opened to the fleck of a duster. Hattie came high, as maids go, $150 a week, and no road engagements. She dressed alone. Her part in Love Me Long had been especially written in for the sake of the peculiar kind of comedy relief she could bring to it. A light roar of recognition swept the audience at her entrance. Once in a while a hand clap. So Hattie, whose heart's desire had once been to play Juliet, played maids now, buxomly. And this same Hattie, whose heart's desire had once been to kiss Love, but whose lips were still a little twisted with the taste of clay, could kiss only Love's offspring now, but not bitterly, thanksgivingly. Love's offspring was Marcia, 16, and the color and odor of an ivory fan that has lain in Frangipani, and Hattie could sometimes poke her tongue into her cheek over this bit of whimsy. It was her well paid effort in the burnt cork that made possible, for instance, the frill of real lace that lay to the low little neck of Marcia's first party dress, as if blown there in sea spume. Out of the profits of Hattie's justly famous brown cold cream, guaranteed color fast, mulatto, medium, chocolate, had come Marcia's ermine muff and tippet, the enamel toilet set, the Steinway grand piano, the yearly and by no means light tuition toll at Miss Harperly's select day school for girls. You get the whimsy of it? For everything fair that was Marcia, Hattie had brownly paid for, liltingly, and with the rill of the song of Thanksgiving in her heart. That was how Hattie moved through her time, hugging this melody of Marcia. Through the knife-edged nervous evenings in the theater, bawlings, purple lips with loose muscles crawling under the rouge, fetidness of scent on stale bodies, brown faces that could hook into the look of vultures when the smell of success became as the smell of red meat. All the petty, soiled vanities, like the disordered boudoir of a cocotte, the perpetual stink of perfume, powder on the air and caking the breathing, open dressing room doors that should have been closed, the smelling geometry of the make-up box, curls, corsets, cosmetics, men in undershirts, grease painting. God Almighty Tottie, them's my teddy bears you're putting on. Raw nerves, raw emotions, ego, the actor's overtone. Abroad everywhere and full of strut. Overture! The weight in the wings, dizziness at the pit of the stomach, audiences with lean jaws etched into darkness. Jaws that can smile or crack your bones and eat you. Faces swimming in the stage ozone and wolfish for cue. The purple lips. Almost like a frieze stuck onto the border of each day was Hattie's life in the theater. Passementerie. That was how Hattie treated it, especially during those placid years of the phenomenal New York run of Love Me Long. The outer edge of her reality. The heart of her reality? Why, the heart of it was the long morning hours in her own fragrant kitchen over doughnuts boiled in oil and snowed under in powdered sugar, cookies that bit with a snap, fillet of sole boned with fingers deft at it and served with the merest fluff of tartar sauce. Marcia ate like that, preciously, pecksniffily. An egg at breakfast a gag to the sensibilities. So Hattie ate hers in the kitchen, standing, tucked the shell out of sight, wrapped in a lettuce leaf. Beefsteak, for instance, sickened Marcia, because there was blood in the ooze of its juices. But Hattie had a sly way of camouflage. Filet mignon, so strengthening, you see, crushed under a little millinery of mushrooms and served under glass. Then, when Marcia's neat little row of neat little teeth bit in, and the munch began behind clean and careful lips, Hattie's heart, a regular old bandit for cunning, beat hoppity, skippity, jump. Those were her realities. Home, the new sandwich cutters, heart shape, diamond shape, spade, the strip of hall carpet newly discovered to scour like new with brush and soap and warm water. Epstein's meat market throws in free suet. The lamp with the opal silk shade for Marcia's piano. White oilcloth is cleaner than shelf paper. Dotted Swiss curtains, the ones in Marcia's room, looped back with pink bows. Old sashes, pressed out and fringed at the edges. And if you think that Hattie's 6 rooms and bath and sunny, full sized kitchen on Morningside Heights were trumped up ones of the press agent for the Sunday supplement, look in. Any afternoon, Tuesday, say, and Marcia just home from school. On Tuesday afternoon of every other week Hattie made her cream, in a large copper pot that hung under the sink. 6 dozen half-pint jars waiting to be filled with brown cold cream. 144 jars a month. Guaranteed color fast, mulatto, medium, chocolate. Labeled, sealed, sold, and demand exceeding the supply. An ingratiating expert cream known the black face world over. It slid into the skin, not sootily, but illuminating it to winking African copper. For instance, Hattie's make-up cream for Linda in Love Me Long was labeled chocolate, but it worked in even a truer brown, as it had come out of the pigment instead of gone into the pores. 4 hours of stirring it took, adding with exact minutiae the mysteriously proper proportions of spermaceti, oil of sweet almonds, white wax. But never mind. Hattie's dark secret was her own. 14 years of her black art as Broadway's maid de luxe had been her laboratory. It was almost her boast now, remember the sunken headstones, that she had handled spotlessly every fair young star of the theater's last 10 years. It was as mysterious as pigment, her cream, and as true, and netted her, with occasional extra batches, an average of $200 a month. She enjoyed making it, singing as she stirred, or rather stirring as she sang, the plenitude of her figure enveloped in a blue and white bungalow apron with rick rack trimming. Often Marcia, home from day school, watched. Propped up in the window frame with her pet cat, a Persian, with eyes like swimming pools with painted green bottoms, seated in a perfect circle in her quiet lap, for all the world in the attitude of a sardelle, except for the toothpick through. Sometimes it almost seemed as if Marcia did the purring. She could sit like that, motionless, her very stare seeming to sleep. To Hattie that stare was beautiful, and in a way it was, as if two blue little suns were having their high noon. Sometimes Marcia offered to help, because toward the end Hattie's back could ache at this process, terribly, the pain knotting itself into her face when the rotary movement of her stirring arm began to yank at her nerves. "Mommy, I'll stir for a while." Marcia's voice was day schooled, as clipped, as boxed, and as precise as a hedge. Neat too, as neat as the way her clear lips met, and her teeth, which had a little mannerism of coming down after each word, biting them off like threads. They were appealing teeth that had never grown big or square. Very young corn. To Hattie there was something about them that reminded her of a tiny set of Marcia's doll dishes that she had saved, little innocences. "I don't mind stirring, dear. I'm not tired." "But your face is all twisted." Hattie's twisted face could induce in Marcia the same gagged pallor that the egg in the morning or the red in the beefsteak juices brought there. "Go in and play the piano a while, Marcy. I'll be finished soon." "Sh! No, Pussy kitty is asleep." As the cream grew heavier and its swirl in the pot slower, Hattie could keep the twist out of her face only by biting her tongue. She did, and a little arch of sweat came out in a mustache. The brown mud of the cream began to fluff. Hattie rubbed a fleck of it into her freckled forearm. Yes, Hattie's arm was freckled, and so was the bridge of her nose, in a little saddle. Once there had been a prettiness to the freckles because they whitened the skin that they sprinkled, and were little stars to the moon reddiness of Hattie's hair. But the red of the moon had set coldly in Hattie's hair now, and the stars were just freckles, and there was the dreaded ridge of flesh showing above the ridge of her corsets, and when she leaned forward to stir her cheeks hung forward like a spaniel's, not of fat, but heaviness. Hattie's arms and thighs were granite to the touch and to the scales. Kindly freckled granite. She weighed almost twice what she looked. Marcia, whose hips were like lyres, hated the ridge above the corset line and massaged it. Mab smacking the Himalayas. After a while, there in the window frame, Marcia closed her eyes. There was still the illusion of a purr about her. Probably because, as her kitten warmed in its circle, its coziness began to whir mountingly. The September afternoon was full of drone. The roofs of the city, from Hattie's kitchen window, which overlooked Morningside Heights, lay flat as slaps, tranced, indoor quiet. Presently Hattie began to tiptoe. The 72 jars were untopped now, in a row on a board over the built-in washtub. 72 yawning for content. Squinch her enormous spoon into the copper kettle and flop, gurgle, gooze softly into the jars. 1, 2, 3. At the 68th, Marcia, without stirring or lifting her lids, spoke into the sucky silence. "Mommy?" "Yes, Marcy." "You'll be glad." Hattie, pausing at the 68th. "Why, dear?" "I came home in Nonny Grossback's automobile. I'm invited to a dinner dance, October the 17th, at their house in Gramercy Park." The words must have gone to Hattie's knees, because, dropping a spat of mulatto cold cream on the linoleum, She sat down weakly on the kitchen chair that she had painted blue and white to match the china cereal set on the shelf above it. "Marcy! And she likes me better than any girl in school, mommy, and I'm going to be her chum from day on. And not another girl in school is invited, except Edwina Nelson, because her father's on nearly all the same boards of directors with Mr. Groesbeck, and Marcia, Marcia! And you came home from school just as if nothing had happened. Child, sometimes I think you're made of ice." "Why, I'm glad, mommy." But that's what there were, little ice glints of congealed satisfaction in Marcia's eyes. "Glad," said Hattie, the word full of tears. "Why, honey, you don't realize it, but this is the beginning. This is the meaning of my struggle to get you into Miss Harperly's school. It wasn't easy. I've never told you the strings I had to pull. Conservative people, you see. That's what the Grosbecks are, too. Home people. The kind who can afford to wear dowdy hats and who have lived in the same house for 30 years. Nome's mother was born in the house they live in. Substantial people who half sole their shoes and endow colleges. Taxpayers, policy holders, church members. Oh, Marcia, those are the safe people. There's a Grosbeck memorial window in the rock church." "I used to be so afraid for you, Marcy. Afraid you would take to the make believe folks, the play people, the theater. I used to fear for you. The Pullman car, the furnished room, that going to the hotel room, alone, nights after the show. You left me sometimes for just throwing a veil over my face and coming home black faced. It's because I'm too tired, Marcy, too lonesome for home. On the road I always used to think of all the families in the audience, the husbands and wives, brides and grooms, sweethearts. After the performance they all went to homes, to brownstone fronts like the Grosbecks, to cottages, to flats, with a snack to eat in the refrigerator or laid out on the dining room table, lamps burning and waiting, nighties laid out and bed covers turned back. And then me. Second rate hotels, that walk through the dark downtown streets, passing men who address you through closed lips, the dingy lobby. There's no applause lasts long enough, Marcia, to reach over that moment when you unlock your hotel room and the smell of disinfectant and unturned mattress comes out to you." "Ugh!" "Oh, keep to the safe people, Marcia. The unexciting people, maybe, but the safe home building ones with old ideals and old hearthstones." "Nonie says they have one in their library that comes from Italy." "Hitch your ideal to a hearthstone like that, Marcia." "Nonie goes to Writing Academy." "So shall you." "It's $6 an hour." "I don't care." "Her father's retired except for being director in banks. And, momie, they don't mind, dear, about us. Nonie knows that my father is separated and never lived at home with us. She's broad minded. She says, just so there's no scandal, a divorce, or anything like that. She said it's vulgar to cultivate only rich friends. She says she'd go with me even if she's forbidden to." "Why, Marcy, darling, why should she be forbidden?" "Oh, Nonie's broad minded. She says if two people are unsuited they should separate, quietly, like you and my father. She knows we're one of the first old Southern families on my father's side. I'm not trying to make you talk about it, dear, but we are, aren't we?" "Yes, Marcy." "He he was just irresponsible. That's not being not nice people, is it?" "No, Marcy." "Nonie's not forbidden. She just meant in case, momie. You see, with some old families like hers, the stage But Nonie says her father couldn't even say anything to that if he wanted to. His own sister went on the stage once, and they had to hush it up in the papers." "Did you explain to her, Marcy, that stage life at its best can be full of fine ideals and truth? Did you make her see how regular your own little life has been? How little you know about my work? How away I've kept you? How I won't even play out of town engagements so we can always be together in our little home? You must explain all those things to your friends at Miss Harperly's. It helps with steady people." "I have, momie, and she's going to bring me home every afternoon in their automobile, after we've called for her brother Archie at Columbia Law School." "Marcy! The Grosbeck automobile bringing you home every day!" "And it's going to call for me the night of the party. Nonie's getting a lemon taffeta." "I'll get you ivory with a bit of real lace." "Oh, momie, momie, I can scarcely wait." "What did she say, Marcy, when she invited you?" "She? Nonie? Why, she didn't invite me, momie." "But you just said " "It was her brother Archie invited me. We called for him at Columbia Law School, you see. It was he invited me. Of course Nonie wants me, and said yes right after him, but it's he who wants Nonie and me to be chums. I he I thought I told you, momie." Suddenly Marcia's eyes, almost with the perpendicular slits of her kitten's in them, seemed to swish together like portières, shutting Hattie behind them with her. "Oh, my, Marcy," said Hattie, dimly, after a while, as if from their depths. "Marcy dearest." "At Harperly's, momie, almost all the popular upper class girls wear a boys' fraternity pin." "Fraternity pin?" "It's the beginning of being engaged." "But, Marcy." "Archie's a Pi Phi." "A what?" "A Pi Phi. Phi Pi. Marcy, dear." On October 17th, Love Me Long celebrated its 200th performance. Souvenir programs, a few appropriate words by the management, a flashlight of the cast, a round of wine passed in the after the performance gloom of the wings, aqueous figures fading off in their orderly backstage fashion of a well established success. Hattie kissed the star. They liked each other with the unenvy of their divergent roles. Miss Robinson even humored some of Hattie's laughs. She liked to feel the flame of her own fairness as she stood there waiting for the audience to guffaw its fill of Hattie's drolleries, a narcissus swaying reedily beside a black crocodile. She was a new star and her beauty the color of gold, and Hattie, in her lowly comedian way, not an undistinguished veteran, so they could kiss in the key of a cat cannot unseat a king. But just the same, Miss Robinson's hand flew up automatically against the dark of Hattie's lips. "I don't fade off, dearie. Your own natural skin is no more color fast. I handled Elaine Doremus in the Snowdrop for 3 seasons. Never so much as a speck or a spot on her. My cream don't fade." "Of course not, dear. How silly of me. Kiss me again." That was kind enough of her. Oh, yes, they got on. But sometimes Hattie, seated among her sagging headstones, would ache with the dry sob of the black crocodile who yearned toward the narcissus. Quite without precedent, there was a man waiting for her in the wings. The gloom of backstage was as high as trees, and Hattie had not seen him in 16 years. But she knew, with the stunned consciousness of a stabbed person, that glinting instant before the blood begins to flow. It was Morton Sebree, Marcia's father. "Morton." "Hattie." "Come up to my dressing room," she said. as matter-of-factly as if her brain were a clock ticking off the words. They walked up an iron staircase of unreality. Fantastic stairs, wisps of gloom, singing pains in her climbing legs like a piano key hit very hard and held down with a pressing forefinger. She could listen to her pain. That was her thought as she climbed, how the irrelevant little ideas would slide about in her sudden chaos. She must concentrate now. Terribly, Morton was back. His hand, a smooth, glabrous one full of clutch, riding up the banister. It could have been picked off, finger by finger. It was that kind of a hand. But after each lift, another finger would have curled back again. Morton's hand ascending the dark like a soul on a string in a burlesque show. Face to face, the electric bulb in her dressing room was encased in a wire like a baseball mask. A burning prison of light. Fat sticks of grease paint with the grain of Hattie's flesh printed on the daub end. Furiously brown cheesecloth. An open jar of cream, chocolate, with the gesture of the gouge in it. A woolly black wig on a shelf, its kinks seeming to crawl. There was a rim of Hattie au naturel left around her lips. It made of her mouth a comedy blubber, her own rather firm lips sliding about somewhere in the lightish swamp. This was all of Hattie that looked out, except her eyes. They were good gray eyes with popping whites, now, because of a trick of blackening the lids. But the irises were in their pools, in violet. "Well, Hattie, I reckon I'd have known you even under black." "I thought you were in Rio." "Got the hankering after the States, Hattie." "I read of a Morris Sebree died in Brazil. Sometimes I used to think maybe it might have been a misprint, and that you were the one." "No, no, live and kicking. Been up around here a good while." "Where?" "Home, N'Orleans. My mother died, Hattie. God rest her bones. Know it?" "No." "Cancer." It was a peculiar silence. A terrible word like that was almost slowly soluble in it, gurgling down. "Oh." "Sort of gives a fellow the shivers, Hattie, seeing you kind of hiding behind yourself like this. But I saw you come in the theater to night. You looked right natural. Little heavier." "What do you want?" "Why, I guess a good many things in general, and nothing in particular, as the saying goes. You don't seem right glad to see me, honey." "Glad!" said Hattie, and laughed as if her mirth were a dice shaking in a box of echoes. "Your hair's right red yet. Look mighty natural walking into the theater to night. Take off those kinks, honey." She reached for her cleansing cream, then stopped, her eyes full of the foment of torture. "What's my looks to you?" "You've filled out." "You haven't," she said, putting down the cold cream jar. "You haven't aged an hour. Your kind lies on life like it was a wall in the sun. A wall that somebody else has built for you stone by stone." "I reckon you're right in some ways, Hattie. There's been a meandering streak in me somewheres. You and my mother, God rest her bones, had a different way of scolding me for the same thing. Lot of Huck Finn in me." "Don't use bad boy words for vicious, bad man deeds." "But you like me. Both of you like me, honey. Only two women I ever really cared for, too. You and my mother." Her face might have been burning paper, curling her scorn for him. "Don't try that, Morton. It won't work any more. What used to infatuate me only disgusts me now. The things I thought I loved in you, I loathe now. The kind of cancer that killed your mother is the kind that eats out the heart. I never knew her, never even saw her, except from a distance, but I know, just as well as if I'd lived in that fine big house with her all those years in New Orleans, that you were the sickness that ailed her, lying, Squandering, gambling, no count son. If she and I are the only women you ever cared for, thank God that there aren't any more of us to suffer from you. Morton, when I read that a Morris Sebree had died in Brazil, I hoped it was you. You're no good. You're no good." She was thumping now with the sob she kept under her voice. "Why, Hattie," he said, his drawl not quickened, "you don't mean that." "I do. You're a ruiner of lives. Her life, mine. You're a rotten apple that can speck every one it touches." "That's hard, Hattie, but I reckon you're not all wrong." "Oh, that softy Southern talk won't get us anywhere, Morton. The very sound of it sickens me now. You're like a terrible sickness I once had. I'm cured now. I don't know what you want here, but whatever it is, you might as well go. I'm cured." He sat forward in his chair, still twirling the soft brown hat. He was dressed like that, softly. Good quality loosely woven stuffs. There was still a tan down of persistent youth on the back of his neck, but his hands were old, the veins twisted wiring, and his third finger yellowly stained like meerschaum darkening. "Grantin' everything you say, Hattie, and I'm holding no brief for myself, I've been the sick one, not you. 20 years I've been down sick with hookworm." "With devilishness." "No, Hattie, it's the government's diagnosis. Hookworm. Been a sick man all my life with it. Funny thing, though, all those years in Rio knocked it out of me." "Faugh!" "I'm a new man since I'm well of it." "Hookworm! That's an easy word for ingrained no countness, deviltry, and deceit. It wasn't hookworm came into the New Orleans Stock Company where I was understudying leads and getting my chance to play big things. It wasn't hookworm put me in a position where I had to take anything I could get. So that instead of finding me playing leads, you find me here, blackface. It was a devil, a liar, a spendthrift, no count son out of a family that deserved better. I've cried more tears over you than I ever thought any woman ever had it in her to cry. Those months in that boarding house in Peachtree Street down in New Orleans. Peachtree Street! I remember how beautiful even the name of it was when you took me there, lying, and how horrible it became to me. Those months when I used to see your mother's carriage drive by the house twice a day and me crying my eyes out behind the curtains. That's what I've never forgiven myself for. She was a woman who stood for fine things in New Orleans, a good woman whom the whole town pitied. A no count son squandering her fortune and dragging down the family name. If only I had known all that then. She would have helped me, if I had appealed to her. She wouldn't have let things turn out so secretly, the way they did. She would have helped me. I You Why have you come here to jerk knives out of my heart after it's got heated with the points sticking in? You're nothing to me. You're skulking for a reason. You've been hanging round, getting pointers about me. My life is my own. You get out." "The girl? She well?" It was a quiet question, spoken in the key of being casual, and Hattie, whose heart skipped a beat, tried to corral the fear in her eyes to take it casually, except that her eyelids seemed to grow old even as they drooped, squeezed grape skins. "You get out, Morton," she said. "You've got to get out." He made a cigarette in an old, indolent way he had of wetting it with his smile. He was handsome enough after his fashion, for those who liked the rather tropical combination of dark ivory skin and a hair a lighter shade of tan. It did a curious thing to his eyes. Behind their allotment of tan lashes they became neutralized, straw colored. "She's about 16 now. Little over, I reckon." "What's that to you?" "Blood, Hattie. Thick." "What thickened it, Morton? after 16 years. Used to be an artist chap down in Rio, on his uppers. One night, according to my description of what I imagined she looked like, he drew her. Yellow hair, I reckoned, and sure enough." "You're not worthy of the resemblance. It wouldn't be there if I had the same." "You haven't," he said suddenly, his teeth snapping together as if biting off a thread. "Nor you." Something that was the whiteness of fear lightening behind her mask. She rose then, lifting her chair out of the path toward the door and flinging her arm out toward it, very much after the manner of Miss Robinson in Act II. "You get out, Morton," she said, "before I have you put out. They're closing the theater now. Get out." "Hattie," his calm enormous, "don't be hasty. A man that has come to his senses has come back to you humble and sincere. A man that's been sick. Take me back, Hattie, and see if—" "Back!" she said, lifting her lips scornfully away from touching the word. "You remember that night in that little room on Peachtree Street when I prayed on my knees and kissed your shoes and crawled for your mercy to stay for Marcia to be born? Well, if you were to lie on this floor and kiss my shoes and crawl for my mercy, I'd walk out on you the way you walked out on me. If you don't go, I'll call a stage hand and make you go. There's one coming down the corridor now and locking the house. You go, or I'll call." His eyes, with their peculiar trick of solubility in his color scheme, seemed all tan. "I'll go," he said, looking slim and Southern, his imperturbability ever so slightly unfrocked. "I'll go, but you're making a mistake, Hattie." Fear kept clanging in her, fire bells of it. "Oh, but that's like you, Morton. Threats! But thank God, nothing you can do can harm me any more." "I reckon she's considerable over 16 now. Let's see." Fire bells, fire bells. "Come out with what you want, Morton, like a man. You're feeling for something. Money. Now that your mother is dead and her fortune squandered, you've come to harass me? That's it. I know you, like a person who has been disfigured for life by burns knows fire. Well, I won't pay." "Pay? Why, Hattie, I want you back." She could have cried, because, as she sat there blackly, she was sick with his lie. "I'd save a dog from you." "Then save her from me." The terrible had happened so quietly. Morton had not raised his voice, scarcely his lips. She closed the door then and sat down once more, but that which had crouched out of their talk was unleashed now. "That's just exactly what I intend to do." "How?" "By saving her sight or sound of you." "You can't, Hattie." "Why?" "I've come back." There was a curve to his words that hooked into her heart like forceps about a block of ice. But she outstared him, holding her lips in the center of the comedy rim, so that he could see how firm their bite. "Not to me." "To her, then." "Even you wouldn't be low enough to let her know." "Know what?" "Facts." "You mean she doesn't know?" "Know? Know you for what you are and for what you made of me? I've kept it something decent for her, just the separation of husband and wife, who couldn't agree, incompatibility. I have not told her," and suddenly could have rammed her teeth into the tongue that had betrayed her. Simultaneously with the leap of light into his eyes came the leap of her error into her consciousness. "Oh," he said, and smiled, a slow smile that widened as leisurely as sorghum in the pouring. "You made me tell you that. You came here for that, to find out." "Nothing the sort, Hattie. You only verified what I kind of suspected. Naturally, you've kept it from her. Admire you for it."
But I lied. See, I know your tricks. She does know you for what you are and what you made of me. She knows everything. Now what are you going to do? She knows. I lied. Then stopped at the curve his lips were taking and at consciousness of the pitiableness of her device. "Morton," she said, her hands opening into her lap into pads of great pink helplessness. "You wouldn't tell her on me? You're not that low." "Wouldn't tell what?" He was rattling her, and so she fought him with her gaze, trying to fasten and fathom under the flicker of his lids, but there were no eyes there, only the neutral, tricky tan. "You see, Morton, she's just 16, the age when it's more important than anything else in the world to a young girl that's been reared like her to to have her life regular. Like all her other little school friends, she's like that, Morton. Sensitive. Don't touch her, Morton. For God's sake, don't. Some day when she's past having to care so terribly, when she's older, you can rake it up if you must torture. I'll tell her then. But for God's sake, Morton, let us live. Now." "Hattie, you meet me to morrow morning and take a little journey to one of those little towns around here in Jersey or Connecticut, and your lie to her won't be a lie any more." "Morton, I don't understand. Why?"
"I'll marry you."
"You fool," she said, almost meditatively. "So you've heard we've gotten on a bit. You must even have heard of this," placing her hand over the jar of the brown cold cream. "You want to be in at the feast. You're so easy to read that I can tell you what you're after before you can get the coward words out. Marry you. You fool!"
It was as if she could not flip the word off scornfully enough, sucking back her lower lip, then hurling. "Well, Hattie," he said, unbunching his soft hat, "I reckon that's pretty plain."
"I reckon it is, Morton."
"All right, everybody to his own notion of carrying a grudge to the grave. But it's all right, honey. No hard feelings. It's something to know I was willing to do the right thing. There's a fruit steamer out of here for New Orleans in the mawning. Reckon I'll catch it."
"I'd advise you to."
"No objection to me dropping around to see the girl first? Entitled to a little natural curiosity. Come, I'll take you up home this evening. The girl. No harm."
"You're not serious, Morton. You wouldn't upset things. You wouldn't tell that child."
"Why, not in 1,000 years, honey, unless you forced me to it. Well, you forced me. Come, Hattie, I'm seeing you home this evening."
"You can't put your foot."
"Come now, you're too clever a woman to try to prevent me. Course there's a way to keep me from going up home with you this evening. I wouldn't use it if I were you. You know I'll get to see her. I even know where she goes to school. Mighty nice selection you made, Hattie. Miss Harperly's."
"You can't frighten me," she said, trying to moisten her lips with her tongue, but it was as dry as a parrot's. It was hard to close her lips. They were oval and suddenly immobile as a picture frame. What if she could not swallow? There was nothing to swallow. Dry tongue. Oh God, Marcia! That was the fleeting form her panic took, but almost immediately she could manage her lips again. Her lips, you see, they counted so. She must keep them firm in the slippery shine of the comedy black.
"Come," he said, "get your makeup off. I'll take you up in a cab." How do you know it's up?" "Why, I don't know as I do know exactly. Just came kind of natural to put it that way. Morningside Heights is about right, I calculate." "So you have been watching?" "Well, I don't know as I put it that a way. Naturally, when I got to town, first thing I did, most natural thing in the world. That's a mighty fine car with a mighty fine boy and girl brings our girl home every afternoon about 4. We used to have a family of grosbeaks down home, another branch, I reckon." "Oh, God!" A malaprop of a tear, too heavy to wink in, came rolling suddenly down Hattie's cheek. "Morton, let us live, for God's sake. Please." He regarded the clean descent of the tear down Hattie's color fast cheek, and its clear drop into the bosom of her black taffeta housemaid's dress. "By Jove, the stuff is color fast. You've a fortune in that cream if you handle it right, honey." "My way is the right way for me." "But it's a woman's way. Incorporate, manufacture it, get a man on the job, promote it." "Ah, that sounds familiar. The way you promoted away every cent of your mother's fortune until the bed she died in was mortgaged. One of your wild cat schemes again. Oh, I watched you before I lost track of you in South America, just the way you're watching us now. I know the way you squandered your mother's fortune, the rice plantation in Georgia, the alfalfa ranch, the solid rubber tire venture in Atlanta. You don't get your hands on my affairs. My way suits me." The tumult in her was so high, and her panic so like a squirrel in the circular frenzy of its cage, that she scarcely noted the bang on the door and the hairy voice that came through. "All out." "Yes," she said, without knowing it. "You're losing a fortune, Hattie. Shame on a fine, strapping woman like you, black facing herself up like this when you've hit on something with a fortune in it if you work it properly. You ought to have more regard for the girl. Black face!" "What has her father's regard done for her? It's my black face has kept her like a lily." "Admitting all that you say about me is right. Well, I'm here eating humble pie now. If that little girl doesn't know, bless my heart, I'm willing she shouldn't ever know. I'll take you out to Greenwich to morrow and marry you. Then what you told her all these years is the truth. I've just come back, that's all. We've patched up. It's done every day. Right promoting, and a few $100 in that there cream, well." She laughed. November rain running off a broken spout. Yellow leaves scuttling ahead of wind. "The picture puzzle is now complete, Morton. Your whole scheme, piece by piece. You're about as subtle as cornbread. Well, my answer to you again is get out." "All right, all right. But we'll both get out, Hattie. Come, I'm a goin' to call on you all up home a little while this evenin'."
"No, it's late. She's—"
"Come, Hattie. You know I'm a goin' to see that girl one way or another. If you want me to catch that fruit steamer to morrow, if I were you I'd let me see her my way. You know I'm not much on raising my voice, but if I were you, Hattie, I wouldn't fight me."
"Morton, Morton, listen. If you'll take that fruit steamer without trying to see her, would you? You're on your uppers, I understand. Would 100, 200—"
"I used to light my cigarette with that much down on my rice swamps."
You see, Morton, she's such a little thing with big eyes. All her life those eyes have looked right down into me. believing everything I ever told her. About you too, Morton. Good things. Not that I'm ashamed of anything I ever told her. My only wrong was ignorance and innocence. Innocence of the kind of lesson I was to learn from you."
Nothing was ever righted by harping on it, Hattie.
"But I want you to understand. Oh, God, make him understand. She's such a sensitive little thing. And as things stand now, glad I'm her mother. Yes, glad, black face and all. Why, many's the time I've gone home from the theater too tired to take off my make-up until I got into my own rocker with my ankles soaking in warm water. They swell so terribly sometimes. Rheumatism, I guess. Well, many a time when I kissed her in her sleep, she's opened her eyes on me, black face and all, her arms up and around me. I was there underneath the black. She knows that. And that's what she'll always know about me, no matter what you tell her. I'm there, her mother, underneath the black. You hear, Morton? That's why you must let us live."
My proposition is the mighty decent one of a gentleman.
"She's only a little baby, Morton, and just at that age where being like all the other boys and girls is the whole of her little life. It's killing all her airiness and fads and fancies. Such a proper little young lady. You know the way they clip and trim them at finishing school. Sweet 16 nonsense that she'll outgrow. Tonight, Morton, she's at a party, a boy's, her first. That fine looking yellow haired young fellow and his sister that bring her home every afternoon. At their house, Gramercy Park. A fine young fellow. Phi, Pi."
Looky here, Hattie, are you talking against time?
"She's home asleep by now. I told her she had to be in bed by 11. She reminds me, Morton, I couldn't wake her. Morton, Morton, she's yours as much as mine. That's God's law, no matter how much man's law may have let you shirk your responsibility. Don't hurt your own flesh and blood by coming back to us now. I remember once when you cut your hand it made you ill. Blood. Blood is warm, red, sacred stuff. She's your blood, Morton. You let us alone when we needed you. Leave us alone now that we don't."
But you do, Hattie girl. That's just it. You're running things a woman's way. Why, a man with the right promoting ideas."
There was a fusillade of bangs on the door now, and a shout as if the hair on the voice were rising in anger.
"All out, or the doors'll be locked on ya. Fine doings."
She grasped her light wrap from its hook and her hat with its whirl of dark veil, fitting it down with difficulty over the fizz of wig. "Come, Morton," she said suddenly. "I'm ready. You're right, now or never." "I'm ready. You're right, now or never."
"Your face."
"No time now. Later, at home. She'll know that I'm there, under the black."
So do I, Hattie. That's why
"I'm not one of the ready made heroines you read about. That's not my idea of sacrifice. I'd let my child hang her head of my shame sooner than stand up and marry you to save her from it. Marcia wouldn't want me to. She's got your face, but my character. She'll fight. She'll glory that I had the courage to let you tell her the truth. Yes, she will," she cried, her voice pleading for the truth of what her words exclaimed. "She'll glory in having saved me from you. You can come. Now, too, while I have the strength that loathing you can give me. I don't want you skulking about. I don't want you hanging over my head or hers. You can tell her to night, but in my presence. Come."
yes, sir," he repeated, doggedly, and still more doggedly. "Yes, sirree."
following her, trying to be grim, but his lips too soft to click. "Yes, sir." They drove up silently through a lusterless midnight, with a threat of rain in it, hitting loosely against each other in a shiver my timbers taxicab. Her pallor, showing through the brown of her face, did something horrid to her. It was as if the skull of her, set in torment, were looking back through a transparent black mask, but, because they were not lips, forced to grin. And yet, do you know that while she rode with him Hattie's heart was high? So high that when she left him finally, seated in her little lamplit living room, it was he whose unease began to develop. If she's asleep, Hattie." Her head looked so sure, thrust back and sunk a little between the shoulders. "If she's asleep, I'll wake her. It's better this way. I'm glad now. I want her to see me save myself. She wouldn't want me to. You banked on mock heroics from me, Morton. You lost." Marcia was asleep, in her narrow, pretty bed, with little bow knots painted on the pale wood. About the room all the tired and happy muss of after the party. A white taffeta dress with a whisper of real lace at the neck, almost stiffishly seated, as if with Marcia's trimness, on a chair. A steam of white tulle on the dressing table, a buttonhole gardenia and a tumbler of water. One long white kid glove on the table beside the night light. A naked cherub in a high hat, holding a pink umbrella for the lamp shade. "Dear me! Dear me!" screamed Hattie to herself, fighting to keep her mind on the plane of casual things. "She's lost a glove again. Dear me! Dear me! I hope it's a left one to match up with the right one she saved from the last pair. Dear me!" She picked up a white film of stocking, turning and exploring with spread fingers in the foot part for holes. There was one. Marcia's big toe had danced right through. Dear me! Marcia, sleeping, very quietly and very deeply. She slept like that, whitely and straightly, and with the covers scarcely raised for the ridge of her slim body. Sometimes Marcia asleep could frighten Hattie. There was something about her white stillness. Lilies are too fair and so must live briefly. That thought could clutch so that she would kiss Marcia awake, kiss her soundly because Marcia's sleep could be so terrifyingly deep. "Marcia," said Hattie, and stood over her bed. Then again, "Marcia," on more voice than she thought her dry throat could yield her. There was the merest flip of black on the lacy bosom of Marcia's nightgown, and Hattie leaned down to fleck it. No, it was a pin, a small black enamel pin, edged in pearls. Automatically, Hattie knew. Fie! "Marcia!" cried Hattie, and shook her a little. She hated so to waken her. Always had. Especially for school on rainy days. Sometimes didn't. Couldn't. Marcia came up out of sleep so reluctantly. A little dazed, a little secretive, as if a white bull in a dream had galloped off with her like Persephone's. Only Hattie did not know of Persephone. She only knew that Marcia slept beautifully and almost breathlessly. Sweet and low. It seemed silly, sleeping beautifully. But just the same, Marcia did. Then Hattie, not faltering, mind you, waited. It was better that Marcia should know. Now, too, while her heart was so high. Sometimes it took as many as 3 kisses to awaken Marcia. Hattie bent for the first one, a sound one on the tip of her lip. "Marcia!" she cried. "Marcy, wake up!" and drew back. Something had happened. Darkly. A smudge the size of a quarter and the color of Hattie's guaranteed not to fade cheek lay incredibly
on Marcia's whiteness. Hattie had smudged Marcia. Hattie had smudged Marcia. There it lay on her beautiful, helpless whiteness. Hattie's smudge. It is doubtful, from the way he waited with his soft hat dangling from soft fingers, if Morton had ever really expected anything else. Momentary unease gone, he was quiet and Southern and even indolent about it. "We'll go to Greenwich first thing in the morning and be married," he said. "Shh," she whispered to his quietness. "Don't wake Marcia." "Hattie," he said, and started to touch her. "Don't," she sort of cried under her whisper, but not without noting that his hand was ready enough to withdraw. "Please go now." "Tomorrow at the station then. 11. There's a train every hour for Greenwich." He was all tan to her now, standing there like a blur. "Yes, Morton, I'll be there. If please you'll go now." "Of course," he said. "Late. Only well, paying the taxi strapped me temporarily. A 10 spot. Old hat would help." She gave him her purse, a tiny leather one with a patent clasp. Somehow her fingers were not flexible enough to open it. His were. There were a few hours of darkness left, and she sat them out, exactly as he had left her, on the piano stool, looking at the silence. Toward morning quite an equinoctial storm swept the city, banging shutters and signs, and a steeple on 122nd Street was struck by lightning. And so it was that Hattie's wedding day came up like thunder. End of The Smudge by Fannie Hurst.